Hello, welcome everyone. We're so happy that you're here. Heidi and I are really excited about today's session. We have some learning targets for us as a group. As we always start off with very focused learning targets now, but the idea of designing instructional experiences connected to your curriculum design. We're going to really focus on how you move from a well mapped curriculum and a well designed curriculum right down into the classroom and the instructional experiences that they're intended to really drive home the benefits. We're also going to look at how that connects to authentic assessments. We're going to look at how I can design learning experiences that are brain friendly. Yeah, we're going to the brain science one more. We got a lot of nice feedback on that. And we're also going to look at engagement. We're going to look at how to even assess engagement. That'll be a good part of our conversation. We're looking at employing instructional grouping strategies. We all say, hey, let's do groups. We're going to go into the different types and why you might use them. We're going to look at increasing student interaction and connections. And then we're going to look at how I can utilize accessible lesson plan templates. We're going to look at different kinds and why they look different. Heidi's going to share some exciting new work that she's been a part of. And to make sure that the number one aspect of anything we design is so that it gets communicated clearly to our learners. We are really excited about today's session. Let's get started. Oh, who's in control of the...
You should be good now.
Okay, let's go.
Good to have you all with us today. The essential question has been one through line through every session, both in this set and the earlier set that we conducted in the earlier part of 2021. And that question is, how can we prepare our learners for the future? We want you to think about your kids, the kids you're teaching, and how you are making choices to engage and prepare them. So here's an interesting challenge. We use the word engagement. We've got to figure out what it looks like. We've got to figure out what we know it when we see it in learners. We know when they're disengaged, but when they're engaged, how can we design that experience so that we have them hooked, we have them committed, we have them motivated?
So as Heidi and I work through curriculum mapping as a science, right, and an art, we've gone through all these pieces throughout all of our sessions, right? Desired outcomes, genre focus, essential questions, content and skills, and formative and summative assessments. What we want to do today is retouch on those, right? Like a Velcro, but to anchor it in the learning experiences, the lesson plans, the activities. We have a lot of words for these things, but what they aren't is mass producible, meaning there's not just one way to do it. And so we encourage flexibility. We're going to encourage courage today, but we're going to always be focusing down here on these learning experiences. So we're going to start off genre focus. Let's go on in.
Thank you. When you're designing learning experiences, one of the most important questions is the genre you're going to choose. And what do I mean by that? Think about literature. If you are a writer, you can write a memoir. You can write a vignette. You could write a biography. You could write a set of essays. The point here is each of those genres allow you to communicate in a slightly different focus or way. And it matters. It really affects things. So one of the things that we really want to think about here and have written about is the idea that as composers of curriculum and the daily plans that students experience, the lens you choose is really important. And so here's 5 options. Think about it for a moment, because it really gives you a meaty tool, a really important tool. You can design learning experiences that are topical. Pretty classic subject matter grouping. You can always find a topic in an encyclopedia. You could choose it through the lens of a theme. So it's more of a conceptual emphasis and also often frequently interdisciplinary in nature. You could design learning experiences that are problem-based. So your learners are focusing on a very real specific problem with an absolute goal to create a solution. Issue-based investigations are dealing with looking at a point of controversy that can't be resolved. If it could be resolved, it wouldn't be an issue. So the job isn't to try to resolve the issue because you can't, but you can explore it. You can look at how people have different perspectives and why they do. Case studies are a wonderful way to manifest student learning, where students have a chance to go into a specific work, like a work of literature or a specific place in a social studies examination and so forth. Let's show you some examples. So if a teacher is working on the topic of solar energy and designing lesson plans, they may elect to have some plans that deal with the theme of sustainability, or maybe a problem, how to design a solar collector to run the school, or look at the issue, the clash between conservation versus jobs, or a case study. In this case, let's look at a specific place, Biosphere 2 in Tucson, Arizona.
Another example can come from mathematics. We all tend to have in our mathematics sequence a unit called measurement. But we don't have to stop there, right? What are we going to be connecting it with? So I might have a lesson that's connected to measurement, right? But I can go deeper. Maybe I could go into a theme on the job in the world. Now I can really, and it's more than just mentioning a career that's connected to it, right? That would be something to explore, make deliverables around. Or I could go after a challenge or a problem, as Heidi was mentioning, something where I expect the students to actually give a prototype or a presentation on how to improve safety at our local amusement park. And this is something where we might even go so far as to genuinely have them connect with the amusement park and have their presentation with an authentic audience. More on that later. Or I could go into an issue, not expecting a solution, safety versus thrill. And I want to stress here in terms of brain science that we don't want the students debating issues. That encourages with very young minds to galvanize on an emotional defense. What you're going for here is to explore perspective and point of view. You want them to be able to stretch, right, their thinking. So maybe you host a symposia, maybe you have them write a narrative where we sympathize with two characters who are on opposing sides of an issue. Or go into a case study. Heidi and I both are originally from New York, and there's a dragon coaster there that is a wooden roller coaster. So that's kind of safety and thrill all wrapped up in one. But they could do a deep dive into it, inherently interdisciplinary.
This one's timely, very obviously. You could explore the topic of the pandemic, or you could look at a theme of quarantine, literature, where someone has been quarantined, or the idea of the impact of setting yourself apart in isolation and really begin to probe that. Then there's the reality of a problem, how to return to school with social distancing. Boy, here's a good issue. Who decides who is essential in a pandemic? Or case studies. And right now, even at this recording, there's a tremendous range given the world right now, and resources that are available, the size of country, and what an opportunity for students to explore with compassion and take a look at this question. Here's the main thing we want to get across. I don't think there's anything we do with teachers that more quickly has an impact on engagement than moving an old style, let's cover the curriculum lesson plan into something that has some juice. So we share this with you as a wonderful way to engage your lessons by designing them to be more engaging. Thank you. So Keenan, what have we got here about upgrading?
So we're going to build a little bit on that idea of changing the genre of your units. And one thing I did want to kind of highlight is we're going through today's presentation is we'll see from the curricular perspective how we can make some of these changes and work through that. And then as we're going through how we can tie that directly to the learning experiences and the lessons that we're creating as teachers for our individual students. So from the curriculum perspective here, we're currently sitting in chalk, we're looking at our units, and we're currently in our solar energy unit. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is if we're looking to change the genre, the topic here, we can change very simply starting by the unit title. So I'm just going to jump into my unit title here, and drawing from that example we were looking at earlier, we'll change this to how to design a solar collector collector to run our school. So simply by just making this change live in our document, that's propagating throughout everywhere where we're going to be using this unit. I'll hand it back to Marie and Heidi here to continue on some of the different ways we can look at changing the context of our content. And we'll actually be updating this unit as we're working through today's presentation.
So we're going to ask you to think about a lesson you're teaching. We want to play a little bit here. So we hope you're all willing to give it a try. Think about a lesson. Maybe take a lesson that's pretty straightforward, maybe topical. We're going to go cover this or look up material. Think about how you could shift it. Is there a way you could take an upcoming lesson and move it into a different genre? Make it a problem. Squeeze the issue out of it to examine. Think about a case study you might do, or a specific instance you might dive into, or possibly a theme that it might touch on. We're going to ask you, if you would, to just throw out a new idea for how you could change a lesson from an old style genre into something a little more refreshed. So let's take a few minutes here and let's see what pops up in the chat. Thank you. Oh, here's one. We've already got it. That's an interesting point, MR. Oh, look at that. Allison is off and running. Problem. It's a problem-based one. That's great. Oh, that's good. That's really cool. Ooh, altruism lesson. Oh my
A good
God.
thing to remember as we work through challenge and problem pieces is thinking about the deliverable, right? If you want a prototype, say it. If you want a presentation, say it. Wrestling with a problem. Sometimes in schools, I think we didn't really empower students to offer a genuine solution and within a time frame. So nicely done. Kitty Genevieve.
These are really good. Modern day tragedy, royal family scandal. Terrific. That's wonderful. Garden in our grounds. Look at that. These are terrific, Lisa. I love this. Let's get a few more. These are just wonderful. The point is, you can take the mundane and breathe life into it.
And there's a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes, as you do this more and more, have the students participate in filling it out as a part of a lesson. Have students use it as a choice. Maybe part of your class as a lesson works in one genre while another part of the class works in a different one. The application at the activity and lesson level is endless. I'm sure you agree, Heidi.
I do very much. I'm loving what's popping up here.
I know I almost don't want to move forward, right? Like this could be
let
it keep happening.
You know, Marie's reminding me that we've got to do this, but oh, look at this.
What it means to be a Canadian. Theme, values. Yes.
There's some themes and issues. These are terrific. And so let's move forward along this line. Okay, so we're going to take a look now. Marie's going to start to take a drive into how we can tweak our essential questions to big ideas in the design of our daily plans and our instructional planning, and how we can use those as another lever in making this work. Marie?
Sure. I think when I first started with essential questions, I was a high school math teacher, and I'm going to just own it. I didn't understand it. I hadn't needed essential questions to learn. And so I honestly thought it was a curriculum thing only, meaning it was a way to organize my curriculum. It was the chapter headings. I felt I was doing a compliance piece to organize a unit. I never really finished the thought to taking it down into lesson planning and into my activities. I knew I had to have them posted in my classroom, right? So when I worked with essential questions, what I want to do today is really connect with why it needs to actually make it all the way down to lesson planning and needs to make it all the way down into my activities. So here we go. I might have, when I started off, I had teacher facing essential questions, things I used to organize my curriculum. How do literary devices affect the author's impact on the reader? What Heidi and I are suggesting now is you really want to think about how the student experiences the essential question. How do they understand and connect with it? How can I hook my readers? Look at the use of the pronoun I, me, we. How does where people live affect how they live? It could even be how am I impacted by where I live? The point here is it's about brain science. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But crafting our essential questions, if everyone took a moment to look at the essential questions in your units, if all they are is your content and skills regurgitated in question form, Heidi and I invite you to really think about them as the student experience and something that can't just be looked up in my materials, right? Something that connects to the learning and is worth returning to again and again. So the point here of an essential question is to drive the student's experience in the classroom, right? It's to nurture that learning experience at a why level, not necessarily the what level. That's why you don't want to just be able to have one answer to it. It's not something I can just look up in my materials. It's something that as the student is wrestling with knowledge and skills, they are thinking about why are we forcing them? We're going to use that kind of language. Why are we as educators forcing them to learn this? They don't come into school going, integers moved me this weekend. I just can't wait to see what's going to happen, right? So we really don't want the students to be in compliance on this. We want them to have something worthy, something that they can return to at a Y level to connect the long-term retention, right, of the content and skills that we're teaching them. And it's got to be something that connects to why society even funds us to do that. Keep thinking about that as a source of really good essential questions. And you do use them to organize your materials, but it's not just the curriculum map. Look at this graph. So if essential questions are the why, right? That's the why level. I might have 2 to 5 essential questions for a unit. Every essential question is going to have supporting questions that the student has to wrestle with to get the information they need to wrestle with the essential question, to answer the essential question. You and I could align those to the content and the skills. The content and the skills, for sure, that's the what. Okay, so now that's my curriculum map. That's my unit plan. But look what has to happen. I need lesson plans and lesson plans and activities. I might need 2, 3, 4 lesson plans and activities just to help a student answer one supporting question. And then when they have that supporting question, they're more prepared to answer an essential question. Well, what does that mean? That means every lesson plan could be directly aligned to an essential question. Now, it might be 3, 4, 5, 8, and 10 of them all working together throughout a unit to help support the answering of an essential question. But if we don't make that crystal clear to the student, I mean more than just posting it on my wall in my classroom and more than just discussing it. Oh, I totally just discussed it. Okay, discussing the essential question is insufficient. What I'm suggesting here is the students actually have to answer the essential question and use the content and skills from the unit to craft us a support to their answer repeatedly throughout the unit. Maybe they do it early on in the unit. Then they craft an additional answer later. Maybe they answer it again as a part of a lesson at the very end of the unit, which means they could look at their essential questions as almost like a breadcrumb trail of the experience of the unit through the
Let
lessons. Yes, Heidi.
let me just hop on here. I want everybody to take a beat. That was um, beautifully said. It really was. But I want you to look at something from a design point of view. Picking up on your point, if I look at not top down, if I go across where I look at all these daily lesson plans, you'll note they all belong someplace. That if I'm a learner, I know what it is I'm seeking. I know there's a question there. Imagine if we had some lesson plans that don't connect. That happens all the time. Then students go, why am I doing this? I don't see why I'm doing this. That in a way, I've often used the analogy of chapters in a book. You go to a chapter, you see the pages. The pages belong someplace. You don't have a place in a book that says, here's all the pages, we just couldn't figure out where they go. So there's a logic to this, and it really helps us all stay focused, not only the kids, but us. Thank you.
You know, there's another part to that, Heidi, that you and I've gone down. Do you remember we used to have teachers answer their own essential questions?
I do.
And one of those things that we found every time was we might have two gorgeous essential questions, but when we answered them, it took the exact same content and skills to support it, meaning they were redundant when you take it to the brain level. And so that's a great opportunity for teachers to say, I love both of these essential questions, but they really are pulling at the same content and skills. So which one's the best one? And I could even have the students help me answer that, couldn't I? Right? I could have the students wrestle with, oh, look how we're going to build that. But I can't have an essential question that doesn't align. To Heidi's point, I can use this to evaluate my lesson plans and activities. I can also use this to evaluate my essential questions. If you don't actually help the kids craft an answer to the essential question, maybe it's a motivating question. Maybe it's something that I can wrestle with, but it's a different purpose. It's not organizing lesson plans and activities. All right. And so we need to challenge its purpose. So let's do a little brain science on this. Why is that the case? And why is Marie now a convert? And I fully believe in essential questions. And not only that, actually getting them answered. And here's why. There are two kinds of brains when it comes to learning. Okay, there's what you and I today are going to call a spiderweb brain and an inchworm brain. The spiderweb brain, or an analyzing brain, relies on the why to guide their retention and to keep them focused and engaged. The inchworm brain, also known as a synthesizing learning brain or an academically inclined brain or a linear brain, all those words were the same sort of research, relies on the what. In other words, they kind of want a breadcrumb trail that they go piece by piece by piece, and then they get an aha moment when they synthesize it all together and say, oh, now I know why you had me do all those things. Whereas the spiderweb brain needs a comprehensive whole. And it can stick seemingly disconnected pieces of information and retain it long term and apply it. Okay. In other words, analyzing it. They take the whole and they can break it down into any piece and remember it. So that's the argument. This all came out of the 90s. That was the argument. All of the unit plan designers who said, hey, we need these big questions. We need these big why pieces of curriculum. And we need that granular what level of the curriculum. And not only do I need them in my unit plan, I need them every single day in my lesson plan. Every single day, I need to have available and clearly aligned an essential question for my spiderweb brain moments and the breadcrumb trail of the learning targets, the content and skills for my inchworm moments, because my students every day are going to be using those as entry points into the learning and for what they're going to retain. That's at a lesson plan level that has to be available. But here is the insidious part. Dun, dun, dun. You can't sort your kids by spiderweb brain and inchworm brain. You can't say, all my inchworms over here today. Here's your learning targets. All of my spiderweb brains over here, please. Doesn't work like that. All humans have strong capacity for both of these. And there's actually a physical change in your body when you're switching. Let's say I'm in my dominant spiderweb brain. I'm like, I totally get what they're saying. I love this. I love the why, but I don't even know where to start. Look at what just happened to me. My muscles tensed and I was like, there was like a sound that came out. That's your brain shifting from the I'm good as a spider web, but I don't have a breadcrumb trail. I don't even know where to start to do what they want me to do. On the other side, here's the inchworm brain transitioning to the spiderweb brain. I'm working, I'm filling in this graphic organizer, I'm doing everything this just feels like compliance. I feel like I'm going nowhere. I feel like I'm just going in circles. I have no understanding why am I doing this? My voice went up. Actually, there's a temperature change in my body. You can't tell it, but maybe I'm sweating more. But the idea here becomes the inchworm brain has stopped engaging because they don't get the why. And so that's that shift. Your students do this in every content area and at any moment, which is why your lesson plan must be prepared to catch them when they need you most. All right, so that's the essential questions. Notice those supporting questions went right to the content and skills. Let's do a deep dive into how the content and skills feed the learning experiences and lesson plans.
If we want to hook our students, and that's what we're talking about right now, isn't it? We're looking at how we can make design decisions on the daily plans, the way we gear and focus our instruction, and how the students spend time. And one of the things we have to be very deliberate about is to ensure that the content, the what they study, and the skills they employ are relevant and they're timely, they're current, they can relate to them. So when we do that, we want to work with them on being digitally literate. We've often said that a lot of our students, I wonder if you would agree with this, a lot of our students aren't digitally literate. They have digital access, but they're not necessarily discriminating or discerning users of these tools. We want them to be really savvy with media and good judges of sources and to use the most current types of material. But that means we need to do it too, you know? Right there you see one of our very favorite sources, Nusella. I work with Nusella directly. I love their work. They're a great example of, they not only have a daily news that is also translated into other languages. If you could go back, thank you. But it's also an approach that includes sets of timely sources for teachers. It's just one example. If we will put in a link in a few moments to the clearinghouse we have at Curriculum 21, where we have a myriad of really exciting and interesting digital approaches and tools that Marie and I and some of our colleagues have put together and teachers have submitted to. The point here is you do need to be very deliberate about upgrading, staying current, using the genre. You've got to be a right now teacher. Otherwise, we're not preparing, going back to our essential question, our learners for the future. Next slide, please. And I believe this is you, Keenan. I think you're going to go back in and let's see what we can do to perhaps do a little more upgrading on some of the essential questions, content, and skills in that unit you're working on.
Yeah, so we're going to come back into Chalk here, and we're still working in our solar energy unit. So at this point, we've updated it, kind of focusing on that different genre approach. And now we're going to take a look at how we can kind of upgrade our essential questions. So kind of keeping in mind everything we're building for right now, we're going to be able to leverage these resources in our day-to-day planning. We'll be able to show that towards the end of today's webinar. So let's just say, for example, here, we're wanting to jump in. We can just click in to start creating content. So if we wanted to add in another essential question, so this one is kind of more related, oops, there's no S there, more related to that genre that we set. So how to design a solar collector to run our school. And the essential question could be, why does the type of energy we're using matter? So that could be, as you're seeing here, that language around we, kind of focusing that around ourselves and the students and the environment we're in. Within here, we can also correlate that directly to any specific standards or learning objectives that we're incorporating. We'll be able to see how we can tie those into our lessons later. If we keep going here, we're building through our unit, we're on a roll, we're looking for other ways that we can kind of start building out those more content and skills that are related to this. So we can throw in a supporting question here along with a resource. So we're actually going to use a Newsella resource. So this one was actually something, as we were planning this webinar, I thought it was actually really cool, this link from Newsella. Didn't even know this was possible, but I'm just going to grab it here. I'll pop it in. I'll quickly show everyone because I think it's worth sharing. Copy the link here. I can just come over here. I'm just going to put Newsella resource. We'll link that in. And then I can go ahead and jump right to this right from here. So I'll just quickly show it to you, but just showing how that's going to be directly accessible for all of our colleagues as they're working through. But I don't know if anyone else knew this, but solar panels being able to drive power from raindrops, but that's pretty amazing. So I think that'd be a great topic to share with our students, and we'll be able to kind of throw that in. And then maybe there's a conversation where this came up with our colleagues and we're actually wanting to kind of tag them in there. They brought up another resource. So right in the same environment, we can actually just kind of tag our colleagues. That other cool article you were looking at. So we can tag them in right here, bring our colleagues right into the conversation, and they can actually collaborate live with us right in this. So everything we're doing to upgrade our curriculum is in this living, breathing environment that, as I was saying later on, we'll be actually able to pull this directly into our lessons. So I'll pause there for now. I'll hand it back over to Marie and Heidi so we can continue on with the presentation, and we'll jump back into that a little later.
So now what we'd like to do is do a quick dive into the idea of assessment. And this is a huge one because assessments, I think people were always very comfortable feeling that assessments made it down to lesson plans. But being comfortable with it and doing it with intentionality and making sure that those formative assessments really were where we were seeing problem solving and courage in the classroom. Seeing that those formative assessments were building instruction. They actually operate often as instructional experiences and not just check-ins to inform the teacher. Beyond that, having the summative be something that is that piece of celebration, that idea of proof of if they're working with standards, but more than being for the teacher, right? They're for the student. So Heidi and I are going to talk about how the students are using that to collect and build their own portfolios of what they know are good at and what they're able to do. The idea of them being able to use that for goal setting. So it is more than just, okay, we know it happens at the classroom. How does it happen for the student? And is it the best possible journey for them? Let's take a look. So assessment, sometimes when we say the word assessment, it just jumps into test, right? Or it jumps into project. And Heidi and I are not really sure what we mean by that when we say that. We want some clarity here. And we find it is very helpful to speak about assessment as evidence. It's evidence of something, right? So maybe it's evidence of my process. Maybe it's evidence of my growth. Maybe it is evidence of my knowledge and my skills. Maybe it's evidence of my contribution to this thinking beyond what other people have already done. And so that word evidence can be very helpful for you and I when we're planning instruction. What evidence is going to come out of this learning experience? And that's for the student. Just adjusting our narrative on this can be very helpful because the word assessment test, for example, is very much what a teacher does to a learner, right? That and even a project, right? I am going to assign this project, figure out what I'm expecting, and you might get an A. We're shifting from that, right? We've moved past that. So this is really something about designing experiences and then designing the evidence that will come from it. If you and I move in that direction, you're going to get engagement. Students don't want to come to school to have it happen to them, right? They want to come to school and be a part of the process. They're just as excited to produce meaningful work, right? So that's how our lesson plans are going to present it to them. So Heidi's done a lot of work in this. She has the 3 tiers of assessment, and this has kept growing. And so I'm really excited to think about assessment this way. I remember when I was learning how to be a teacher, this term drill and kill came out, right? That it was drill and kill. And we were almost told to be like shameful if we were doing drill and practice, like, oh, you have to do something more rigorous, right? And I was concerned about that. I sat there and said, well, wait a minute. Sometimes drills and practice is vital. It's important. And so this work inspired me because I dare us to find any professional athlete who says, yes, practice, I never do it anymore. Just, highest level of competition at all times for me, folks, no drills. See, that's not true. right? So drill and practice is important for granular improvement of student performance. If I want either to focus on memorizing certain pieces of knowledge, or if I want to develop the basic level of skill or take it to the next level, music does this well, art does this well, phys ed does this well, mathematics, science, social studies, reading and writing, it's all the same at a neurological piece. So drill and practice, learn it, love it, use it, but only when it's the right learning target for it. Okay. If I want to put learning targets together and I want to do more rigorous events, now I'm in rehearsal and scrimmage. This is something where I'm putting complex pieces of curriculum together. But think about rehearsals. Rehearsals are a student practicing or presenting their thinking, immediately getting feedback, immediately getting notes that they then take, and they should do the event again. So I am not talking about a project that I turn into you and you grade me. And we go, okay, well, next year when you do that project again, good luck. No, no, no. Immediately during instruction. So I want you to picture lessons where students are asked to do something, immediately get notes on it, and then they're asked to do it again, but not drill and practice. This is the more rigorous piece. All right. They get to do that speech several times. Okay. Rehearsal, scrimmage. It's absolutely the way to improve student performance. Inherently in these are reflection. Reflection moments really should. When I was a math teacher, I told you I would do reflection at the end of a project. Hey, kids, what do you think happened? I got the worst reflections in the world. And what I found out was it's because I didn't teach them how to do it. And I didn't give them feedback on their reflections. The idea here of reflection is it should happen right in the beginning, all throughout the process, and at the end. It's connected to goal setting. It's one of the greatest ways to improve student performance. And then that gets us to authentic assessment. And this is very close to Heidi's and my heart, and many of our colleagues. Allison Zamuda has helped with this, Benna Kalik. But the idea of authentic assessment is really about motivation. All right. This is not where I'm going to go to try and diagnose the standards. That's a weekend of your life you'll never get back. This is not where I'm going to try and see if they've got the granular knowledge and skills. This is about brain motivation and moving them toward a purposeful event. And Heidi's going to take us deeper into that. Oh, wait, but first we're going to go here. Heidi and I are excited about this one because this is how neurologically you and I can assess engagement. We used to go, we would do trainings where we would have administrators come in and we would say, oh, we want to see engagement in the classroom. All right, well, that's cool. What does it look like? Heidi asked this right in the beginning of our presentation. She said, what does engagement look like? What does it sound like? Well, I can tell you that it's not just the kids talking. It's not just the kids being obedient. It's not just the children being on task. They might just be in the obey state. They might just be doing what they're told. That does not mean they are aware of what they're doing and why they're doing it. So really, the invitation here is for you and I as teachers to help the students be metacognitively aware, thinking about what they're doing and why they're doing it. That moves from the obey state to active learning state. So ask your students to think about, what am I learning? Do they know the learning target? Why am I learning it? Do they know the essential question? How am I learning it? Do they know what learning strategies we're doing right now? Why are they working with a partner? Or why are they working on their own? Do they know that? If they do, if they can answer those 3 questions, you're at a level 3 engagement. Let's look at the next one. How will I know if I've learned it? It can't be because my teacher gave me an A on the project, right? We're asking the student to know the criteria for success. If they actually know the criteria of success, imagine if they helped co-create the rubric. If they know the criteria for success, then they can self-assess. So self-assessment is one of the highest levels of engagement. That means they know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and even how well they're doing it. Level 4 engagement. But the last one, how do I feel about learning it? Now they might say, oh, this is the most amazing thing I've ever done. It's fantastic. They could. They might say, I hate every minute of what's happening on this. Has been the biggest challenge for me. I have absolutely had to pull in every help asset I have to make it through this. Either response, as educators, you and I win. That's maximum retention. This student will not forget. Apathy is the tool of forgetting. Apathy. If they're just doing it because you told them to do it and their parents are making them do it because they need to get an A, this is where school is happening to them. So if you want engagement in your lesson plans, picture this. This is called framing the learning. You could just teach the kids what they're learning, why they're learning it, how they're going to learn it today, how they'll know if they've learned it by the end, and you're going to ask them how they feel about it. It could be the starter and the closure. That could be your exit ticket. You will get more engagement in your classroom.
I'm just going to touch on this a little bit. Authenticity is sort of the holy grail right now, isn't it? We want to ensure that students get to play the game, that they get to be in a concert. So what does that look like? An authentic experience in a calc course, or in history class, or fourth grade rocks and minerals. It's doable. It really is. And what you want to consider and may want to explore are the 4 conditions that make that a legitimate opportunity. And so we're looking at a situation that provides a real opportunity to solve an actual problem or a situation so that they can see the context. It's oriented in an actual place. I'm talking concretely. It could be personal. It could be at my home. It could be a locality. It could be another part of the world. But it's situational. There's an audience. That's real important. Rehearsals we do for our coaches, for the music conductor. But then we got to have a real place to perform it. And even if it's feedback, say, from a group of experts, I don't mean to minimize this by saying if it's only the teacher, your role is critical, but it isn't sufficient. So what we're looking at is an opportunity for real feedback from the recipients of the service, or the people we perform for, or people who would work on a prototype to tell us how we're doing. And then there needs to be adequate time to carry this out. So let's finish with this last point on time. I think one of the things we often hear is, oh, well, this sounds great, but I don't have time to do this all the time. Well, nobody does. In a school, maybe a music department has 2 concerts in a year, but they have them. And so the point here, it's not all the time. It's when it makes good sense. But if you don't do it, they never get to see themselves as a player. It's very important. Let's keep on rolling here. So we also want learners to take the action, as you were saying, Marie, and one of the things we want to have is a larger theme. And I've seen some questions come up in the chats and comments on that. I like very much that the idea is if students are going to be self-navigating, they need to be agents of their own learning, to look at opportunities and places where they can co-create with you and upgrade their demonstrations, even the most modest of our lesson plans. So here's an example. Originally, the previous lesson and series of lessons was on was a construction in response to a word problem asking students to design a bridge. In this instance, a teacher in Lower Manhattan of New York asked the question, how can we design a pedestrian and bicycle bridge to cross Manhattan to avoid traffic? It was inspired by the actual High Line, which is based in New York City. If you want to look it up, I think you'll find the images extraordinary. It's an elevated train that's been converted into a sort of urban park where you're up walking and you literally feel like you're sort of in a bird flying over the city. So the design occurred, but what I want you to know, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'd like you to notice that they used tools of modern day designers, Google Bridge Constructor. They did their homework and researched really fascinating, as you can see in the image, pedestrian bridges, and worked with their graphic design department so they could make renderings of what this would look like. And in coming up with their designs, they got critiques from engineering grad students at the university in that area. And for them, it was an extraordinary experience to actually look at a real context, how they'd submit them, and what it would look like if they received the feedback. Next slide, please. Marie?
This is another example. And the way this plays out and can play out at the lesson plan level is very exciting because This was for middle school, grade 6. And one of the ideas of connecting math to the social studies and science and literacy is looking at some of the global issues. And in this case, I think they took the theme, right, with sustainability. And when they reach out and say, it's enough to understand what sustainability is, or I might look at certain areas. We work with one school who looks at Greenpoint, New York, for example. But the idea here is, what could I do? Or how can I contribute? When you ask middle schoolers if they can contribute, they're very excited to save the world, right? So now you've got that engagement. And so in this case, again, notice, just like Heidi pointed out before, they used contemporary tools, the Pick2Chart, the Growing Blue tool that they used here. And again, just like the example they had before, once the students constructed their responses, their proposals for solutions, they got feedback and they were able to get commentary back, not just from their teacher or from their colleagues or another class, but university grad students. One thing we found post pandemic is that access to professionals in the field through virtual field study or virtual collaborations has expanded exponentially. If you reach out to any of your universities and say, hey, can we have our students connect using either any of our video tools? They say yes. And professionals are willing to contribute. They say yes. So we encourage you to have your students use these online tools and then get feedback on their work at a professional level.
So we'd like you to post in the chat. There've been some interesting
Yeah.
comments in the last few minutes, but could you just post an idea for an authentic assessment? Remember, it's not the rehearsal, it's not the simulation, an actual situation with the youngest of children or all the way through high school. Let's start brainstorming for just a few minutes, okay? Let's take a few minutes now. Oh boy, Dana, that was strong. Nice, Lori. These are terrific.
Chad, I like that one. We've had some groups of students going through interviewing of octogenarians, people over the age of 80 in their local community, telling stories that haven't been told, and then actually getting them archived and represented in a local historical society. That's getting published, maintaining as a historian. Think of how many standards are met in some kind of activity like that, and the kids love it, and the community loves it.
Let's keep on rolling here. Kind of
Yep.
keeping an eye on
Our
the
time.
clock.
Here we
Thank
go.
you. All right. So we're going to talk just very briefly here. The idea of digital portfolios is wonderful because it's cumulative, and learners are the ones who really select their work. But we think a lot of times people think of it's got to be the big end of unit project, as opposed to so much rich evidence that emerges from a lesson plan. In fact, it can often be that a student is targeting small moves and gains in the way they proceeded. Let me just show you a couple images that I like very much. The next slide, please. This is from the state of Rhode Island, and you'll notice the year, it's 2001. And Rhode Island was the first state in the United States that required digital portfolios. Most of our states don't. But they did, and that students needed to create them. If you even look at the background, it's kind of an old curtain They weren't using cell phones to make films then. But what I love about this, we're not going to play it now, though I'd love to. This girl chose this to show she was able to start to sound out words. She is not making meaning with it. It's like word to word, dawn, got up, that kind of thing. But it's a daily exercise. She chose it to show how she was doing. Next slide. What you're going to see is then what in let me get the next slide.
I know I'm working on it.
Okay, what we see, if you look at this, what you're going to see is this is now in 2002. It's in the spring. She's a little bit bigger. But what happens when you hear her is these small gains. Is she's doing better, and she's reading for sense. One Saturday morning, as it proceeds, the important thing is that students see their own progress, and this one melts me. It's almost 10 years, a little more than 10 years later, and now she's at graduation. And she's speaking on changing education paradigms and is actually referencing Sir Ken Robinson. This gives me the chills. You see, to me, these, in a way, these are all artifacts. They're artifacts of learning that we can be able to follow and see how our students progress. Don't minimize what comes out of small lesson plans that eventually culminate in a demonstration like this one. Continue, please. So we have a quick poll here. Could you share your students' experience with digital portfolios? Our students develop them K-12. Some of our students develop digital portfolios, but not all. Our teachers decide which grade levels, so it's more intermittent. And then even what are they? If you're not sure, you can ask that, or we don't have students doing them. So let's take just a moment.
I'm still reading all these great ideas coming up in the chat. It's fantastic.
These are interesting, really good. Okay, let's see if we can get any. Let's look. Oh, it's a poll. That's right.
Yeah,
Sorry.
let's see the poll.
Okay, let's take a look. Oh,
Okay.
this may be an area where you want to have a look, very, very small number actually do them all the way through. It's an incentive. And I think it actually not only is for the kids, but it helps teachers take a harder look at the day-to-day life of the classroom and what is being produced that is evidentiary, that's solid. Let's continue.
Also, one of the things that can connect, if you design your lessons so that you have the students working in groups or in smaller groups or conferencing, you can have students working with a laptop, making those videos of themselves reading and maintaining their own portfolio during those moments of a lesson plan. So it's much easier to maintain when you organize that way.
Marie?
Okay. So in terms of lesson planning, I know that up until this point, we've been connecting all of our unit planning and our curriculum maps to.
Has she? Okay, you froze.
Oh,
that's all right.
Really?
We are so glad you came back. That's all I'm going to say.
I am here. I was maybe pretending. Was it at least a good freeze?
It was kind of weirdo, but you know what? I've done it. I'll do one with you.
Some of those are so goofy. Okay.
Whatever.
Anyway, Heidi and I really feel passionately that lesson plan templates matter. And we want to share a couple with you and why we feel very strongly about this. See, I remember we would get asked by school districts to design a lesson plan template. They're like, do you have a favorite lesson plan template? Could you just give us one? Or often they would expect all teachers to use the same exact lesson plan template. And then this is what would happen. They would end up making a mega template. And it was a mega template that would just keep adding more boxes because they wanted to put every possibility in their template. Or it was oversimplified and thought that you could force all instructional types into one template. And Heidi and I will share with you that just drives us crazy. If you try to make your lesson plan template a unit plan, or you try to make your unit plan template into a lesson plan, you end up with like the 30-page mega document. And here's what happens. We fill it out beautifully and never use it. All right. That's not, we're card holding members of the Practical Federation. Okay. So I don't want to turn it into a situation where teachers are spending just as much time filling out the template as they are instructing their children. Right. So we call shenanigans. And here's what we propose: really do a deep dive into instructional methodology, and then design a lesson plan template that supports the specific methodology. And that would mean, yeah, you're going to have like 5, 6, 7 different lesson plan templates, but they'll be so useful. Heidi and I want to share a couple of ideas with those. And we can't stress it enough. Simple is better. The more easy and transparent and concise it is, the more likely teachers will turn to it, rely on it, and use it. And more importantly, we're going to push you toward kids. Take a look at this one. This one is about small grouping. I just mentioned that small grouping allows us to do portfolios. But how would I organize that? Well, who would I have in each of my groups? We're going to get more into that in a little bit, but what would be their roles? Write that down. What are the expectations of those pieces? And always, what essential question is going with this and what learning target, right? That's all I need. That's enough to get me into my lesson plan. Let's keep going. I think we have one more here.
Oh, here's,
Yeah, did you see that? That was fun.
yeah, I didn't even know what just happened. Here, I think you're good to,
All right, ready? I'm going to
there
try
we go.
again.
All right.
Woohoo!
Sneak
This
peek of future events.
this is an inquiry-based lesson plan template. Inquiry-based lessons don't need a mini lesson. They don't have all the elements that I would have or normally see in a lesson plan template that's overly rigid. In this one, I love what about this one. It has what the teacher intended and then what actually happened, right? And isn't that the point of an inquiry event? Is you're not in control of what's going to happen. And then I get to reflect on it. Although notice it still has that essential question right there, as we mentioned earlier in our sequence, and the learning target being bright red down here at the lower part. But what I like about this lesson plan template, though, is if I was a teacher who maybe didn't feel so strong about inquiry and hosting an inquiry instructional type, notice how it guides me through it. It cues me on the methodology. That's what I like about a lesson plan template. And I might use that with my colleagues for a little while, but I won't always need it. And then when I'm more secure, I don't need to use this type of piece and I can move into something else. Strategic, is this yours?
Yeah, it's okay.
Woohoo!
That's all right. No big deal. When you looked at those lesson plans, one of the choices I think on a daily level you have to think about is grouping your students for engagement. And so let's go to the next slide. There's a level of decision making on grouping that you don't have a lot of choice about as a teacher, but I think schools could reconsider. Here's some of the things that institutions decide. They decide on the size of the school, whether it's going to be grade level, for example, or gender-based, or whether the school's based on talent or aptitude, or whether there'll be multi-age grouping. But fundamentally, what happens is that you will inherit those students, and you're going to make choices about grouping. And one thing, as Marie goes into looking at instructional grouping, because I might be in an all-girls school based on talent, or in grade level groups, or I could be in a co-ed school, multi-age. Here's the other thing, it's who the kids are. So as we talk about the different choices, it's who they are and what they need. Marie?
So when we think about instructional grouping, a lot of work has been done on this with some of our colleagues. Carol Ann Tomlinson has a lot of good work on ways to think about setting up grouping. But it really comes down to this idea of intentionality, right? I don't want to just always have the kids in the same groups. You and I as adults would get bored with that. So as a teacher, I really want to think about what's the learning target? What are the outcomes I'm thinking about? And then plan and design grouping that would either support that work or specifically support the students. So maybe if it's about granular skill development, I'm going to make decisions based on in terms of grouping for the skill needs, right? I might take all my students who need a similar kind of skill developed and do a small session with them or set up centers that would support them. Or maybe it's more of an adventure piece and I want to differentiate it. So I do mixed skills competence, right? I might use hint cards with certain students to strengthen their ability to play a role, but they can't show the hint cards to their colleagues. So maybe I'm going after communication, I'm going after connection building. Maybe, maybe the whole point is for them to learn roles like they do in problem-based learning events. So now I'm going into the roles that I want to strengthen in the students or talents that I want to pull out. Maybe I do it on timing and readiness. We worked with a group, so they had a chronic lateness. And so students who came in late all got put into a certain group, or students who had completed a homework assignment would go into this group, and students who hadn't completed the homework assignment would go into this group. And part of that would help them with their preparation. We have to look at what our learning environment is and who the kids are and strategically pick groups that support it. Think tanks, if I want the kids to have an outcome where it's a decision, or maybe I survey the students and have them connect based on their interests. Students don't necessarily know one another. They may not have their connections yet. So if I'm doing restorative practices and I'm setting up circles, I might have the students then work and do interests, everyone who likes a particular sport or likes having a certain kind of pet or doesn't even like having pets. What a great way to connect them. Also, social interaction and safety. Where would the social emotional safety be for that students? I remember working with teachers who always said, "Oh, I always keep those two apart because they're best friends." Well, maybe there's really good times to let best friends be together and have them work together on pieces. Civil discourse, if I want them practicing those communication skills, or anchor groups, meaning I might have to shift how they're grouped several times. What if my lesson plan's going sideways and I go, you know what, we need to go into our blue groups? A standing routine anchor group, students know what blue groups are and they go there immediately. We often use this when we need it for safety or a teacher now needs to pay attention to a specific situation. Or ad hoc, recreate a whole nother set of groups for a very specific purpose. Hey, T students, should we have the windows opened or closed on this one? Or how do we want to make sure we're prepared for this presentation we're about to do for our school board? Those are purposeful. We also might want to consider about numbers. Are we going to do this individually? Are we going to do it in pairs or trios or quartets? If I really want the students to help one another because someone's struggling, pairs are going to be much better than 5 or 8. If a student is particularly struggling in something, they can disappear in a group of 5 or 8. But if I want a conversation and discourse coming, 5 or 8 is going to be ideal. If I want them to do something where they're doing short sharing, 12 and more, hey, that's perfect. Maybe I need a whole class or the whole large school community. What kind of space would I need for that? Now we have this option of having some students in class in face-to-face, but some students as virtual in a group. How are you preparing for the groups to have virtual students and students who are on site connecting in a meaningful way? Or are some students being left out? What about global partners? And how much access are we allowing those students to have to that? Also, the idea of nested groups or sharing, meaning I might have my whole group in groups of trios, but then routinely share out to the whole group and then back to my trio, right? So I can have interactive nested groups as part of that number, working very effectively. But here's what this is the point. It doesn't happen accidentally. It doesn't happen perfectly unless we really are intentional about it and we are clear to the students what behaviors we're expecting and what their role is in the process. That's instructional grouping being effective, and that's why you have a lesson plan template to support that.
So we want to finish up this look at templates by showing you a newer approach. Allison Zamuda, a colleague of ours, we've been all working on this idea of simplification. And I want you to notice something. It's really, really streamlined here. That the idea is instead of a lot of additional or ancillary checklists, you really get to the heart of what the episode, each row, would be about in your learning set. And in your learning set, that would be a series of experiences, and we keep the prompts comparable. So engage, examine, demonstrate would be used in any class, and in there we populate what exactly students would be doing. We'll show you what that looks like. But notice it's launched with learning targets that are informed by the standards. The bottom line is this emerged out of the COVID experience because the communication was so rough and kids felt like they were being piled on, jam-packed, keep them busy, long lists of tasks. And it feels like weight. It feels like a burden as you're climbing up the hill. Next slide. What you'll see here is this is a populated one. And what we're looking at is a Mars rover. And one thing we've added here is we also included the learning space, but we could also look at how we group the kids and the type of activities that they would engage in, even as they produce demonstrations. So notice the icons. Next.
One of the big pieces of this that Heidi and I found was that lesson plans used to be really just teacher-centered tools, and the strength of this simplification and the use of icons and the clarity between the essential question being there and the learning target is it became a student-focused lesson plan and family-focused lesson plan for support. That changes the game, and I think in a very good way.
A couple of you just asked, I gave you a link. I've just seen them come up about how you can learn more about this learning set template. Let's take a look right now and get a few takeaways as we begin to wrap things up today. What are some takeaways about lesson plan templates? It's not just the lesson, it's how you communicate it. Thank you.
Yeah, share some takeaways on this piece and some of the experiences you're having with these lesson plan templates. I notice, thank you for sharing. It was Lisa, uh, and dealing with the authorizer, right? If it's a top-down piece, that's one of the biggest struggles we have with lesson plans, that they think it's just, that seems to be a very myopic view of the role of instruction. And so this idea of thinking about how to use it in different ways challenges the idea of one template.
Let me just look at a couple of the comments. The thing about the template is a couple of things behind it, the logic behind it, and it's been field tested for over a year. Parents really like it because, when you're working on curriculum and it was virtual, they really wanted to see what was going on. But here's the point. Many people have got their kids back in school. The parents still like it. So do the kids. And what's cool is I'm not getting a lot of mixed messages, though every teacher can frame it in their own way. Right now, I'm working on a project with a school in California where they're devising their own learning set based on some of the models that we've got. And it is fantastic. And they're able to even take things like IB and AP courses and lay them out. Cool. I love these takeaways.
Yep.
Okay. Boy, we're looking at the clock. Time flies. Time flies with chalk. What can I tell you? Let's go. Let's move forward. Keenan, bring it on home here.
Yeah, there were some questions about what was available in chalk. So
yeah. Yep.
Cool. All right. So we're going to be kind of wrapping it to some of those other things we were talking about earlier. So just quickly looking, so this is where we were working earlier. This is in the curriculum context. So we're kind of going through restructuring the structure of our units, looking at the genre change, looking at the essential questions and supporting questions. We're going to change gears a little bit and look at things from the lesson planning side. So we've been talking about lesson planning throughout our webinar today. And what we want to do is kind of pull in some of those pieces, pull in that unit we were working in, pulling in lesson plan templates, excuse me. And in this scenario, we're currently looking in Planboard. We're working on our lesson for today, Thursday, April 29th. And we're going to be continuing on that science example. So let's say we're kind of working through, we want to be able to tie this directly to that solar, how to design a solar collector to run our school unit. So we're making that connection right here. Maybe this is our first lesson in the series. So introducing solar energy. So we can just throw a title on our lesson there, start creating that content, and right away we can apply a template. So based on the context of how we want to structure this, we can choose from a list of templates. So there's some pretty basic examples in here. You can pick from these, you can customize these. These can be shared with you by your colleagues or your school so that you have some to pull from. In this case, we're just going to grab our science template here, which is actually inspired from the groups template we were looking at earlier. So if we scroll down here, we've now got that as kind of our canvas to start building within. And we're going to start with our essential question, throwing that in will be quick and easy. Just based on us having connected to that unit earlier, we can come into our essential questions and just throw this directly into our lesson. So we can pull that in, it's tied directly to those standards, all with a click. Keep working through here. Because we've structured our template this way, we can add in the type of instructional strategies we're going to use just by filling it out. Keep walking through, building out our content here for ourselves. We can drop in, going back to our unit. Maybe now we want to add one of those supporting questions. So we can pull that in, that Newsella resource we were working with earlier. And now that it's in our lesson, we can customize this. So we can build around this, we can flesh this out and either just have it organized for ourselves so we can pull it up on our mobile app if we need to, or we can do things like share it. So this is one of the cooler things within Chalk where you can actually connect either with your colleagues. So if we actually wanted to share this more fleshed out lesson with one of our colleagues, we can do that from here. We can also share it publicly. So if you wanted to tweet out your lesson, you could do that. If you wanted to share it to your Google Classroom so your students can directly engage with the content, or even Schoology if you have that set up with your account here, there are just a bunch of different ways you can take all those different pieces and tie them together and keep yourself organized so you can kind of keep iterating and improving on those resources. So I'll hand it back to Marie here just to take us home at the end of our webinar here, and then we can jump straight into some Q&A.
Thank you, Keenan. I appreciate that. The idea that Heidi and I feel very passionately about is if you were going to do all this great planning with curriculum and we're going to think about the most amazing evidence and assessment experiences, that during our instruction, that we're committed to making those connections clear and owned by the student. We use the term student facing, but we strongly believe that educators who plan their lessons around those connections and including the student in the process. So we would ask, do you have room in your lesson for the kids? If you do, then as educators, we open doors for students that don't ever close. Again, that is the pathway to a lifelong learner. They have to enjoy the learning experience. And that's what a well-done lesson plan achieves. So we thank you for your time. We thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation. And we want to thank Chalk for sponsoring us and allowing us to really bring some of these ideas to such a great audience. And we appreciate that time. Heidi?
Yes.
And I are ready to do these questions.
Yeah, let's dive in.
No, thank you for everyone who attended today, and thank you both Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Alcock for joining us for our incredible third session. We do have, I think, time for maybe 2 questions that I think people would love to get a take on. So the first one is from Amar. How do we create a balance between a teacher-oriented essential question and a student-generated essential question as what Paul Fear called as problem posing?
Mm-hmm. I can start off, and then I would love to hear what Heidi's going to say on these pieces. But the balance between a teacher-oriented essential question and a student-generated essential question can come from 2 different angles, right? So the first angle is when we talk about designing a curriculum, and Grant Wiggins and Jay McTighe would say things like, well, a unit plan should have 2 to 5 essential questions. And Heidi and I would always say, yeah, what you really mean is teachers should create like 2, right? Or 2 that connect with the content, and maybe 1 that connects with the context, right? That the case study or the theme that I'm connecting with, that I'm putting out as the example or the simulation. If I only take up 3 of those 5 essential questions from a teacher design perspective, then I leave room for additional essential questions to be generated in the origin coming from the students, right? From students as a group. They would actually write a essential question that maybe launched from a posing question. Maybe it's something where they're taking it in a different direction. But what that does is it leaves time in my design for teacher-generated essential questions and personalized or student-generated essential questions. A second way to look at this, though, is also the language I use and how I craft my essential question. Meaning, if I write an essential question where it's from the teacher position, I know the answer I'm looking for, and maybe I use the pronoun you, right? So how can you understand this idea in a meaningful way? That is teacher controlled. I am directing it toward the student and I'm cueing the brain to be in an obey state. So even just including the idea of those personal pronouns. So phrasing it from the student's perspective and experience can transition and include that student generated piece, right? So how do I understand this idea as it connects to my everyday life? Has a completely different tone. And it's cueing the ability for the student to then be a part of that problem as opposed to obeying it and just responding. Heidi, other ideas?
I think I think you said that really beautifully. I think what I'd ask you to think about, to the person who asked, is maybe let's remove the question balance. That's my take on this. Is that you're not looking for a balance. Balance means that it's equal. I don't think so. I think if I understand, and if I were to kind of ask you to consider, I think the question here is the direction is ultimately you really do want students to be able to pose their own questions. You do. So the goal is to make that happen. And at the same time, as you're working and modeling and engaging them in the things they didn't ask for. I mean, they didn't ask for algebra. They didn't ask to learn about what a consonant blend is. You're trying to make it interesting. You want to use questions that motivate and engage them. So I think the question is, where is the context? And keep your eye on the prize of generating more of their capabilities to drive them, and cultivating your own ability to model it and call attention to it, because you're trying to make that part of the process. So I don't know if I'd use the word balance. I totally understood your intention, but I just maybe look at it a little differently. Next question.
Yeah, fantastic. The next question is by Maureen. When we develop any questions, TDQs, we need to write the expected answer for the grade level aligned to the standards. How else would we provide feedback?
I'm not sure I followed the question. I'll be very honest with you. I want to. I want to be sure I'm getting the intention of the question. Could you read it one more time? Because I think there's something in there. Maybe you picked up on it right away, Marie, but I'd just like to hear the question again. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay.
And Maureen, I know you're still in the session, so if you maybe wanted to add anything or clarify, I think that would also be really helpful. So Maureen's, sorry.
Go ahead.
If you would read it, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, when we develop any questions /TDQs, we need to write the expected answer for the grade level, and it has to be aligned to the standards. How else would we provide feedback?
Yeah, now I have a better hunch on that. I think the idea here is there's different types of questions. And because the bottom line here is there is not a correct question for an essential question. It does not exist. Otherwise, it's not an essential question. That would be if I were to ask a question like, what is the purpose of life? I want the right answer. You can't do that. I get what she's asking. I think there are types of questions that are fundamentally looking for a range of approximate or accurate types of answers. Do them. I mean, that's part of it. But at the same time, if you can tweak the question to make it more engaging, I think you're going to be in a lot better shape. Here's the other thing. Where are those going? Isn't it also possible you could take this? It's such an interesting question now that I understand it, I hope a little better.
Right.
Is where is it all going? In other words, if all it is check, 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 but ultimately maybe there's something overarching, overriding that can help drive that. I think that's better. Marie?
Well, and she's being very specific about TDQs as opposed to essential questions. And she was sharing that it's a statement, really. She's doing a little bit of humor at the end there. The idea that it's, we need to write the expected answer for the grade level that's aligned to the standards. How else would you provide feedback? You want to make sure, because I think this might have come up when I was sharing how you and I have teachers write answers to their own essential questions. Remember when we were talking about that? And we were saying, look, you have to make sure there's actually a way to craft an answer to it. Not that there would be the same answers, right? In fact, by design, they shouldn't be, just like you were saying. But it's this wonderful way of saying, if you're going to put a challenge down to the students, if you're going to put a question out there, make sure it's not just a metaphysical exploration that you really don't even expect anyone to craft an answer to. Craft an answer to it, and at the appropriate level. I think something that Maureen would value very much, I think she's at a school in Connecticut that we work with, and it's this idea of, we ask questions and we go, what kind of answer do you think kindergartners are going to give to that? Like, what kind of answer are you expecting to get from 8th graders on that? And that teachers should keep it from the student's experience as they're bringing it into the classroom. And that's exactly what Heidi's getting at, which is, it's got to have lots of room for the kid to get multiple answers and to change their answers as they learn more.
Maybe one other thought. This is now, Maureen, look what you've done. Now you've unleashed us. The one thing I'm thinking about is, you might find the work of J.T. Dillon, University of California, Riverside, who wrote about the mastery of questions. And one of the things he points out is, we all know there's lower level questions where you're really just looking, you're playing fetch.
Exactly.
Bring me the right answer. What's the capital of Ontario? Bring me the right answer, that kind of thing. And that's fine, but there is a right answer. And then, you can talk about questions that are more scaffolded and more open for investigation and plausible. But here's what J.T. Dillon found. If you want to depress student thinking, I'm not talking fetch, I'm talking you really want to get them thinking, the best way to do it, if you don't want them to talk, is a direct question. Because in the back of their mind, they're thinking, what is it that teacher wants me to say? What's right? Whereas indirect questioning is better. So instead of my saying, if I were to say, what is the capital of Ontario? There's a right answer. But what if I were to say something like, what do you think the right capital of Ontario should be? They're still thinking, what am I supposed to say? I want my teacher. I love Marie. I want her to like me. As opposed to something like this, indirectly, you might say, I'm curious to know what you think is would be criteria, or why should people have a capital, or where might it be? I'm curious to know. You will get 3 to 4 times more responses. In other words, instead of it's called witness on a stand, because kids still feel they're playing fetch. And so if we even took some of those issues that came up on the Constitution and some of the other things that were posted earlier, remember those good ones, Marie? People had all these ideas of things to debate. If you say, what do you think the Bill of Rights should be? They're going, what does he want me to think? As opposed to, I'd be curious to know your thoughts about whether the Bill of Rights is still relevant. What it is it really allows people to look at the issue on the table as opposed to each other. All right, Maureen, we finished at 2 questions. We're in the home stretch. And thank you. And Shinjini, I know you've got another session coming up in a week with your wonderful panelists.
No, thank you both for joining us today. Everybody, you can connect with both Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Alcock by going on their Twitter. Please show them some love, show Shock some love. We love love. And you'll be able to email them as well with any questions that you might have from these sessions, but any work that you're actually curious about. I know they love kind of digging in deeper, and I know today we could stay all night if we really wanted to, but we want to respect your time and we want to respect their time. A little bit insight into next week's session. So Keenan, if you can.
Oh, sorry. I realized I was. Yeah. I forgot I didn't give you control. You're good.
First to Keenan. Here we are.
I was engrossed with the conversation.
So engrossed. That's all great. And then, sorry, just the next slide, Keenan. As we know, we do have a wonderful panel that's kind of set up and that's going to be walking you through some of the more practicalities of the theories that we just learned today in the last 3 sessions. And if you had joined us back in February earlier this year and how to go about curriculum mapping, they'll be really diving into how their schools went about the approaches within mapping, change management, some of the challenges they faced, and what they think that the future of curriculum mapping looks like within their school, even during the pandemic and post-pandemic. pandemic. So I think that'd be a really great session. We look forward to seeing you all there. And thank you so much for taking out of the time, of your day to join us. And I know it's just immensely grateful from both the Chalk team to Dr. Jacobs and Dr. Alcock for sharing their incredible insights and ideas with us today.
We thank you. You two are just terrific. And Marie, I will ride anywhere with you. So, thanks, everyone, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your night. Bye-bye.